predsjednik Republike, gospodin Ivo Josipović. Dame i gospodo, riječ dajem gospodinu Nigelu Farageu, za kojeg će, vjerujem, hrvatska javnost još mnogo puta čuti. Beskompromisan kakav jest i odlučan, gospodin Farage prenijet će nam u kakvom je stanju današnja Europa i kakva nas budućnost očekuje. Gospodine Farage, izvolite.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. The first and most important thing is to say a big thanks to Ozana Bazic and Alice Maric. My pronunciation may be poor, but my intentions are good. Thank you, ladies, for organising this debate, because from what I can see from the outside, there has been precious little debate in Croatia thus far about what the European Union really is and about what the implications of joining are. But I can assure you that there is a very real European debate going on in my home country. Indeed, just today, the front page of the Times features Lord Nigel Lawson, a former Chancellor of the Exchequer, who has come out today and said it's time we tore up the Lisbon Treaty, it's time we moved away from the principle of ever closer union, and making the point that this is not the Europe that the British people thought they were joining just over 3 decades ago. So there is a massive debate going on in my country, and the most recent opinion polls show that if we had a referendum in the United Kingdom on our continued membership of the Union, right at the moment, by a majority of about 2 to 1, the British people would vote to leave the EU and to replace that with a genuine free trade agreement. And I am quite convinced, everywhere I go in Europe, that there is one thing that we all want, and that's a Europe where we can cooperate together. That's a Europe where we can agree some sensible, basic, common minimum standards on things. That's a Europe where we can trade together. But what increasingly the peoples of Europe do not want is a political union. And that's what we've got. And I'm tempted to recall the comedian Groucho Marx, who made the comment that he would never want to join a club that would have him as a member. And I think that this is something you should be thinking about, because even if you did, in Croatia, think that joining the EU was a good idea, you wouldn't do it now, would you? I mean, just look at the mess that it's in. The Schengen area, the free movement of peoples. Well, perhaps it's a lovely theory, but when you have a union that now has within it very poor countries indeed, and you have a social security system, what happens under Schengen is that people in very large numbers from poor countries move to rich countries. And so the Danes have effectively in the last few weeks torn up the Schengen Agreement and reintroduced checks and border controls. I guess the other crowning achievement of the European Union was their success in managing to get 17 countries to join the euro, to join the economic and monetary union. Although it's worth noting that not one of those 17 countries had a referendum on joining the euro. They were taken into it by their governments. Only 2 countries had a referendum on the euro, and they were Denmark and Sweden, and of course they both said no. So everybody was corralled together into this euro project. People like myself from the outside have said from the start that it simply could not work, that it wasn't possible to put together into a monetary union economies as diverse as, say, Germany and Greece. And we have a very real crisis. I'm sure that Tony Coughlin can tell you about the situation in Ireland, but certainly for countries like Ireland and Spain, joining the euro meant that they had completely artificially low interest rates for far too many years, which of course led to the most incredible, massive, false housing and property bubble, which has led to total disaster. We've had a bailout of Ireland, we've had a bailout of Portugal, we have had now 2 bailouts of Greece, and all of this is leading to a massive, massive division within Europe. You know, I grew up understanding that Europe was divided between the East and the West. The West, as we saw it, was free, and the East was under Soviet control and domination, and that was the divide in Europe. I put it to you that in the last 5 years, all of that has changed. The big split in Europe now is north to south. And what is happening as a result of this Euro project is the southern countries, or the governments of the southern countries, are asking for more money, and the peoples of the north of Europe are beginning to say no. You'll have noticed that in Finland, in their general election back in April of this year, the True Finns party, previously a party that was considered small and fringe, scored over 19% of the vote and were just 1.5% away from winning that general election. The same thing is happening in the Netherlands, and even in Germany itself, right up to the president of Germany, Wolf, who said just 10 days ago that if we continued with the Euro project, if we continued with the bailouts, which were clearly illegal and in defiance of treaty law, that the price of this European project would in fact be democracy itself. So right across Europe, and particularly in the north of Europe, there are people questioning whether it's worth being a member of this thing. There are people raising democratic arguments, economic arguments, and it's always difficult to predict. But it is quite possible that the whole thing, the whole Euro project, could go bust this side of Christmas. Perhaps it'll take longer than that. But at some point, the realization has to come that just continually throwing bailout money at Greece isn't going to work. So I would argue very strongly that even if you were going to join the European Union, now would be a very, very poor time to do it. And just look at the structure. Just look at the way this whole project operates. It is the European Commission. It is the unelected bureaucracy that have the sole right of initiative. You know, they are the people that propose the legislation. All the European Parliament can do is to check it, to slow it, to amend it, perhaps change some of the grammar. But the real power in this union is not vested in democratic institutions. In fact, right from the very start, from Moray onwards, it was designed that the EU would never be democratic. Monet, who was a super bureaucrat, thought democracy was terribly inconvenient, because with democracy you get a government that steers a course for 4 years, and then perhaps you get another government that wants to steer off in a different direction. This was absolutely useless to Mr. Monet, because he had 20-year plans and 50-year plans, and that indeed is how the Commission continues to this day. I have perhaps made a bit of a name for myself by not being known to be best friends with Herman Van Rompuy or indeed with Mr. Barroso, but I do find it absolutely objectionable that these two people are supposed to be the political leaders of 500 million people. We've never voted for them, and we don't have the power to remove them. And I would have thought that you know, anybody that believed in democracy would consider that to be an absolute affront. There was an opportunity to change the EU and to democratise the EU, and that came with the European Constitution. And if the people who run this project had had the vision to democratise everything, to make the European government come from the European Parliament, and then to have put that vision to the peoples of Europe, they may well have been supported in referendums. It may well have worked, but they chose not to do that. And their constitution, ACAR now, Lisbon Treaty, which is designed to be there forever, has completely excluded any possibility of democratic reform. So I would say to a country like you that have enjoyed your own form of democracy, and you may be critical of your own parliament and government, but at least you have the ability in elections to remove them and replace them with somebody else. I would say to countries like you, whose independence and democracy was very hard won and has been very short-lived, why on earth would you give all of that up? It certainly doesn't make sense to me. And why is all this happening? Well, there is, of course, behind the European project, a line of thinking. And the line of thinking was that because the French and Germans were repeatedly going to war with each other, 1870, 1914, 1939, that the way to stop war was to bind peoples together, to bind them together economically, to bind them together with one government, one flag, one anthem, and one police force. That was the idea. Give people a single state, give them a new identity, a European identity, as opposed to a French and a German one, and it would be peace and prosperity forever. You yourselves perhaps went through a similar kind of experiment after the First World War with the creation of Yugoslavia. You know, much of the thinking with the creation of the European Union was similar to that thinking back then. So I've never taken the view that there was some sort of awful, malevolent, evil force at work behind all of this, some sort of character out of the James Bond movies stroking a white cat. I actually believe that it was well-intentioned from the start. But it really has gone very badly wrong. And the real common denominator now, both in EU member states and in aspirant member states like this, is there is a divide. And the divide is between ordinary people who work, pay their taxes and bring up their families, and the professional political class. You know, when the Swiss had a referendum on whether they should join the European Economic Area, 78% of them said no. And yet the Swiss foreign minister said the following week that despite that, he would still be in negotiations with the EU. The Norwegians have twice emphatically rejected membership of the Union, but still a majority in the Norwegian Parliament would want to join. And just think, if you're a Croatian professional career politician, if you're a Croatian civil servant, just think what European Union membership means to you. Well, I'll tell you what it means. It means riches beyond the dreams of avarice. And I have seen this in country after country after country. The really clever thing, the really corrupt thing about this European Union is they buy their opponents with money. So there'll be 12 Croatians, if you join the European Union, who will go to the European Parliament, and rather than earning the current salary, which I understand is about €2,000 a month in the Croatian Parliament, they'll be on €7,500 a month. But that is peanuts. That is peanuts compared with the bureaucrats and civil servants. They will hit the jackpot. Many of your bureaucrats in Zagreb will go to Brussels and will be earning between 12 and 15,000 euros a month. That is just how corrupting this entire union is. If the people of Croatia want to join the European Union, that's fine, but for goodness sake, please, all of you that are Democrats, whether you believe this is the right thing or whether you believe that this is the wrong thing, make sure that before it happens, you have a full, free and fair debate. Make sure that the yes side and the no side in any campaign have spending limits, so that we don't see abominations such as we saw in Malta, where when Malta joined the EU, the yes side outspent the no side by a factor of about 50 to 1. By all means, have your referendum next year, but I urge that you have a proper, free, frank debate and that it's conducted equally and fairly for both sides. Thank you very much.